Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. Today we are strapping on our detective hats and really diving into the mechanics of critical thinking. Honestly, you can think of logic as your own personal forensic toolkit. It's literally the ultimate way to crack the code of the everyday claims we hear, tear apart shaky evidence, and build absolutely unbreakable cases.
But right off the bat, I kind of want to challenge you. When someone tries to convince you of something, do you actually know what makes their argument a good argument? Are you easily swayed by a super confident tone? Or can you see the hidden scaffolding underneath their words? Well, our goal today is to learn exactly how to distinguish a genuinely solid, ironclad argument from one that's just a flimsy house of cards.
Because let's face it, we are constantly bombarded with bad arguments. Take a look at this polar bear smoothly trying to logic away his dinner by confusing these penguins about the Arctic versus the Southern Hemisphere. It's a hilarious cartoon, but it really hits the nail on the head. If you don't know how to spot a logical fallacy, you might just end up as someone else's dinner. And that's exactly why we need to build up our forensic logic toolkit today. So here is our case briefing for today. 1. Decoding deductive and inductive arguments. 2. Judging an argument's strength. 3. Common logical patterns. 4. Finding the missing pieces. And 5. Blueprinting complex arguments. Let's get right into it.
Starting with Section 1, decoding deductive and inductive. These are our two main modes of investigation.
Basically, every single argument you encounter is going to fall into one of two categories. And the absolutely crucial thing here is understanding what they're trying to achieve. A deductive argument is ambitious, right? It aims to provide logically conclusive support. It's essentially saying, listen, if my premises are true, my conclusion is an absolute 100% guaranteed fact. Like, if I study for my exam, then I will pass. I did study, so I will definitely pass. An inductive argument, on the other hand, is all about probability. It provides probable, not conclusive support. It's saying, based on the evidence we have, this is highly likely. For instance, most university students purchase textbooks. Farzad is a university student, so Farzad probably purchases textbooks. It's not a complete guarantee, but it's a really strong bet. All right, moving to Section 2, judging an argument's strength. Let's talk about the metrics of success. So identifying if an argument is deductive or inductive is really only half the battle. Structure alone isn't going to solve a case for us. We need to measure how successful that structure actually is in reality. Look at this dog. He's thinking, all cats have 4 legs, I have 4 legs, therefore I am a cat. Now this is a spectacular example of an argument that has proper deductive structure. The conclusion naturally follows the premises, but it feels completely in the real world. Why? Because the premises themselves don't provide the right kind of logical support to actually lock in that conclusion. An argument can look perfectly valid on paper, but still lead you to believe you're a cat when you're clearly a dog. So what do we actually label the good arguments? Well, a deductive argument that has a perfect structure is called valid. But if it's valid and all its premises are actually true in the real world, like saying all dogs are mammals and all mammals are animals, therefore dogs are animals, we call that a sound argument. That right there is the gold standard of deduction. For inductive arguments, if the structure makes the conclusion highly probable, we call it strong. And if it's strong and the premises are factually true, like pointing out that human fossils are never mixed with dinosaur fossils because they lived millions of years apart, we call that a cogent argument. Sound and cogent. These are your two ultimate metrics of total success. Now, to figure out if you're dealing with a sound or cogent argument, you can just run through this quick 4-step diagnostic checklist. Step 1, find the conclusion and the premises. Step 2, ask yourself, if the premises are true, must the conclusion be true? If yes, it's deductive. Go check if it's sound. Step 3, if not, ask, if the premises are true, is the conclusion probably true? If yes, it's inductive. Go check if it's cogent. Step 4, if it fails both of those tests, well, you're looking at a failed, invalid, or just plain weak argument. Which brings us to Section 3, common logical patterns. This is where we learn to recognize the suspects. Let's look at the underlying DNA of arguments. These are kind of like mathematical formulas, and honestly, once you see these patterns, you just can't unsee them. The most common uncrackable code is modus ponens, also known as affirming the antecedent. It goes like this. If P, then Q. P happens, therefore Q happens. Think of it like this. If Ontario is in Canada, then it is in North America. Ontario is in Canada, therefore Ontario is in North America. It perfectly preserves the truth. If the premises are true, that conclusion absolutely must be true. Okay, here is another completely bulletproof deductive pattern, modus tollens, or denying the consequent.
This one kind of flips the script. If P, then Q. Not Q, therefore not P. For example, if Montreal is in Vermont, then it is in the United States. But Montreal is not in the United States, so Montreal is not in Vermont. Whenever you spot this exact pattern out in the wild, you know for a fact you are looking at a structurally valid argument.
But hey, you really got to watch out for the usual suspects. These are the invalid patterns that look suspiciously like the good ones, but they are absolutely designed to trick you. The first trap is denying the antecedent. It looks like this. If Einstein invented the steam engine, he's a great engineer. Einstein didn't invent the steam engine, therefore, he's not a great scientist. That is totally false. The premises can be true while the conclusion is utterly false. The second trap is affirming the consequent, like saying, if Brandon is the capital of Manitoba, it's in Manitoba. Brandon is in Manitoba, therefore, it's the capital. Again, it's an invalid structure leading you straight off a cliff to a false conclusion.
So what happens if you're ever stuck staring at an argument and you can't quite tell if its form is valid or invalid? Use this clever little detective trick, the counterexample method. You literally just devise a parallel argument using the exact same structure, but plug in obviously true premises that result in a glaringly false conclusion. For instance, if someone gives you a weird argument, swap their words out and say, if fish are mammals, then they're animals. Fish are animals. Therefore, fish are mammals. The conclusion is completely absurd, right? Which perfectly proves the underlying structural pattern they used is just entirely invalid. Let's jump to section 4, finding the missing pieces. Time to ferret out those unstated premises. Look, very often in the real world, people don't spell out every single premise of their argument, but here is an absolutely critical rule for detectives filling in the blanks. We must use the principle of charity. Just like this quote says, whenever we find someone's meaning unclear, we should attempt to interpret it in a way that makes sense. Good, fair detectives don't build straw man fallacies, meaning we don't distort or intentionally weaken someone's argument just to easily attack it. To really test an argument's true strength, we actually have to give it its strongest, fairest possible interpretation before we even evaluate it. So, to safely and fairly fill in those missing implicit links without accidentally putting words in the author's mouth, use this 3-step process. First, search for a credible premise that would make the argument valid or as strong as possible. Second, choose the supplied premise that is the most plausible and fits best with what the author actually intended. Obviously, if it's totally implausible, the argument might just be broken beyond repair anyway, but if it fits, move to step 3. Evaluate the newly reconstituted argument as a whole. This ensures your investigation is both incredibly thorough and totally reasonable. And finally, section 5, blueprinting complex arguments. Let's map the crime scene. When you're dealing with a massive block of text, keeping track of all the premises and conclusions in your head is basically impossible. You need to map the crime scene, kind of like creating one of those detective corkboards with the red string connecting all the evidence. But before we can draw our map, we have to filter out the noise. First, scan the text and identify indicator words like therefore, since, or because. Second, number all the actual statements in sequential order. Ignore the rhetorical questions or random exclamations. Third, and this is the most important part, physically cross out all the extraneous background noise. Just get rid of redundant sentences or irrelevant fluff. We only want the raw structural beams of the argument. Okay, let's start with the absolute basics of blueprinting here. We put the numbers associated with our premises inside squares and our conclusions inside circles. Imagine someone says, Statement 1, Justin Trudeau has great ideas for the environment. Statement 2, that's for sure. Therefore, Statement 3, Trudeau being elected is good for Canada. Statement 2 is clearly just redundant fluff, so we cross it right out. We are left with premise 1 in a square, with an arrow pointing directly down to our conclusion 3 in a circle. Simple, clean, and entirely logical. Now, let's see how this builds up when we have multiple clues. This diagram illustrates independent premises. Say someone argues, Statement 2, H&M has great prices. And Statement 3, they have a good selection. So, Statement 4, H&M is a great place to shop. Premise 2 and Premise 3 are totally independent. They work like separate, distinct clues that each individually point toward the final verdict. If you take one away, the other still supports the conclusion completely on its own. Notice how they each get their own separate arrows pointing to the circle. But what happens when clues literally have to rely on each other to make sense? This is a brilliant illustration of dependent premises. Just imagine a murder mystery. Statement 3, if Dexter did it, he'd have blood on his sleeve. Statement 4, the bloodstains are there. Neither of those statements proves Dexter is the murderer on its own, right? They absolutely must be combined.
So we visually group them together with an underline, treating them as a single combined premise, and draw one single arrow down to the conclusion.
And finally, we reveal the heavy machinery. This shows how our simple building blocks, independent and dependent premises, combine to map massive multi-tiered arguments. Notice number 10 over on the left side there? It has both a circle and a square around it. This is what we call a subconclusion. It acts as the conclusion for premise 11 above it, but then it turns right around and acts as a premise for the final conclusion, number 6, down below. By breaking long passages into these visual maps, you can literally see exactly how a massive argument holds itself together, or exactly where it falls apart.
We've covered a lot today, from identifying the basic DNA of deductive and inductive arguments to recognizing fallacies, charitably filling in missing premises, and mapping out complex logic like a master detective. So I'll leave you with this. Are you ready to apply this forensic logic to the very next debate you encounter? Take this toolkit out into the real world, start mentally diagramming the arguments you hear, and never get fooled by a polar bear's bad argument again. Thanks so much for exploring this with me.